yeah.
Hey,
Now we're
just
on.
like that. You were right.
Yeah, just like that. Calling Chris
Yeah.
Anderson in Windsor.
I am. I'm still in Windsor, and you look like you're still in Chicago.
Still in Chicago. Exciting times in Chicago.
Is it?
Chicago Bears won their playoff game last night. First time in 15 years.
And so I'm assuming that's important. So congratulations.
Yeah, it's called football, Chris.
No, it's not called football.
It is called.
Let's not have that conversation.
It's called football.
Okay. Whatever.
Yeah. So the Bears won, and they play a home playoff game again next week, which undoubtedly will conflict with our show. But I will manfully come to the show.
And then what happens?
This part of it. Then they'll lose, and the season will be over.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay. Welcome everybody to History Happy Hour. And thanks to Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours for their assistance in bringing you this show. Check out their rich offering of military history tours at stephenambrosetours.com. And whether you're watching live, watching on replay, or listening in your car to the HHH podcast, we're glad you're here. Oh, I skipped right over it.
I mean,
I know.
Podcast.
Today we're going to be talking with Henry Sledge, the son of Eugene Sledge, who wrote one of the most famous soldier memoirs of World War II. Chris, we should make a note here to thank our Patreon supporters.
Absolutely, we should.
And we put up our top shelf supporters, and we are going to be, I think I'm going to devote a little time in our newsletter to Patreon, because we've been doing that for a while, but I want to kind of remind people that it's there, and we can always go to a second screen. I know people.
I think so.
Yeah, I think it would be fine.
Well, you were saying something about doing rolling names or something, like live action.
Well, we could roll names for everybody who's any kind of supporter. So maybe we haven't done that in more than a year, so we should probably do that again. Yeah. So that's a whole thing. Where are we, Chris? Is there anybody out there? Is there anybody?
Are quite a few
watching?
people here. Yeah.
Who's here? Name some.
Ken's joining us from Kansas. Xavier is back, so that's good. John Gallagher from Kentucky. So hi, John. And Homer's calling from the Old Dominion. So welcome,
Homer Hodge. Welcome.
I'm glad the Army Museum let you out.
He's been doing a lot of volunteering work lately.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if George was going to show up today, but maybe he's busy watching football. I don't know. Could be. Well, thank you to everybody who's coming. And Chris, I should ask you, what are you drinking today?
Lefroy.
Okay, so Scotch.
And you?
I have non-alcoholic beer.
That's not even beer. Wait, hold that up again. Hold that up again.
I know you can. You
can read a newspaper. I
can see me through it.
My God, why do you even call that?
Well, I'm 11 days in on dry January, and it's not been hard. It's been good, and I don't need psychological assistance, so we're all happy. Okay, well, we seem to be gathering audience, so maybe we should get this show on the road. What do you say?
There we go. Well rung this week.
Thank you so much. The bar is open. Chris, what do we have on tap today?
Yeah, I'm really super excited about this week's show. We're joined this week by Henry Sledge. He is the son of Eugene Sledge, who is the author of the classic With the Old Breed on Peleliu and Okinawa and China Marine. Henry frequently speaks about growing up as the son of Sledgehammer and his father's experiences during World War II. A guest on several notable podcasts, not including this one, of course, now. He's written for World War II magazine and served as a consultant on several other historical projects. He holds a BA from Auburn University and has 20 years of experience in the heavy equipment industry. And this is his first book, and it is The Old Breed, The Complete Story Revealed, A Father, a Son, and How World War II and the Pacific Shaped Their Lives. And again, I'm super duper excited to welcome Henry to talk about his new book and his father.
Henry, welcome to History Happy Hour.
Thank you, guys. Good to be here.
We really appreciate you being here. We know you didn't bring a cocktail because it's pre-workout, so
yeah,
somebody's going to work out.
Yes. Chris, get us started, please.
Yeah. As much as, it's probably hard to believe that somebody might not have heard about your father. I just want to read a quote here. In 2006, in the book, you mentioned visiting R.V. Bergen, who's one of your dad's old comrades. And Bergen tells you, Henry, I got to tell you, one of the things I always admire about Sledgehammer, I knew he came from a well-to-do family, and he probably could have gotten out of volunteering for the Marine Corps if he'd wanted to. But he didn't do that. He signed up for it. He did his job. I never heard him question an order. He always did everything he was asked or told to do, and he was a damn good Marine. So for those handful of people out there who don't know about your father, tell us briefly about your dad and why we know so many people know about him and admire him so much.
Well, Eugene Sledge was a 60 millimeter mortarman in the 1st Marine Division. To say it as quickly and simply as possible, he fought at Peleliu and Okinawa. He went in as a private, came out as a corporal. His service, there was nothing remarkable about his job as a Marine mortarman other than the fact that he did it skillfully and did it well. But he is known because of the iconic memoir that he left us with his book, With the Old Breed at Peleliu and Okinawa.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the thing is, I mean, he did come from a fairly well-to-do background. My grandfather was a prominent physician in Mobile back in the 1930s and probably could have held some political influence to get my father into to use the expression, a cushier job in the military if my dad had chosen that. But that's not what my father wanted to do. He wanted to enlist in the Marines and go do his part. Now, he started out in an officer's training program at the behest of the family. They begged him, if you're going to go in as an officer. And he did try to do that and ended up intentionally flunking himself out of the officer training program at Georgia Tech because he, along with the majority of the young men in his class, impetuous young men in the flood tide of patriotism, they were afraid the war would end before they could get into any of the action. And so he intentionally flunked himself out. And by the agreement, by doing that, he then assimilated in as an enlisted Marine. And as he said to me, as he said in his book, you know, when they were on the train chugging to the West Coast, because he went through MCRD San Diego for basic training, God, if we had only known what lay before us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the New York Times called his book the best World War II memoir of an enlisted man, but it only used about 30% of the material that he actually wrote. You've gone back to his original manuscript, cut from that original book, and you've reproduced a lot of it in your book. What was your point in doing that? What is your goal in kind of going back and revisiting this material that didn't get into the first book?
Well, Rick, the thing that struck me, I've always had a passion for World War II history, but the thing that has always resonated with me is I've been palpably aware most of my life of the appreciation that people have for my dad's book, for With the Old Breed. Not just Marines, not just other veterans, but it seems like everyone who's taken the time to engage with it finds it incredibly compelling. And John Keegan called it one of the most arresting documents of war literature. It's been compared to All Quiet on the Western Front. It's been compared to the Red Badge of Courage, you know, classic combat memoirs of times gone by. And to have that awareness that I've had of what my dad's book has meant to a lot of people, I felt when I became aware of the fact that there was a lot of material that he had written that did not get published, I felt a sense of, really, I felt a moral responsibility to try to grab some of that material and make it come to life if I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like, of course, this is getting into my ideological conceptual framework that I had to put my head into to write my book. But I felt like the best way to do that was to simply bring the material that had not been published into my own manuscript and then string it all together with my memories of growing up with him, the conversations we had when I was a kid, because everything that he wrote about, everything with the old breed, you know, when he describes landing on the beach, on Orange Beach 2 at Peleliu, when he describes going across the airfield, when he describes being on Ingusibus and attacking that bunker, I heard all of that from him as a kid, out of his own mouth, just him and me talking. And it's such a powerful story for the emotional intensity and the brutal honesty of it. And I just felt it was so compelling that there's more material that he wrote that people might find interesting. It has nothing to do with me. You know, I'm just the voice that carries it along. The whole purpose of my book was so people could read more of what my dad wrote. I never for one second thought that people were going to be that interested in anything I had to say.
So Henry, when somebody gets a copy of your book, then, you know, you touched on this briefly, but maybe kind of get into this a little bit more. What are they getting that they're not getting in the original book? I know, like, you know, just even physically, when you look at it, you have bold sections and then you have non-bold sections, and so just so they know they're looking at something different.
Yeah,
but different.
Yeah, in my book, what I did was the material, and I went back and forth with my managing editor at Post Hill Press quite a bit about this. But I felt like the best way to do it, the sections of my book that are in bold type, that's my dad's writing. Okay, those are my dad's words. The regular type portions are my voice stringing it all together. And the thing, Chris, that I very much wanted to avoid was I didn't want somebody to take my book and just look at it and go, well, he's really not doing anything new here. He's just talking about what his dad talked about. I really tried to avoid that. So there are actually only, I think, 2 places, and I could be wrong, it may be 3, but just a couple places in my book where I directly quote with the old breed.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to add, I have lost count of the numbers of times I've read With the Old Breed, and reading your book now, it was all new to me. So if there was a lot of repeats, I would have picked up on it. So no, this is all new stuff. So,
and thank you for that level of interest.
Oh yeah, no, it was many years ago, when I was still the editor of World War II and MHQ. I was working with Joe Alexander on a project. I can't even remember now what it was. And he actually gave me your dad's number, and your dad wouldn't have remembered this at all. But we had a few brief conversations about it, and he was incredibly gracious and incredibly helpful. And it was pretty powerful for me because I'd read the book so many times to be able to speak with him.
So Chris, you knew Joe Alexander?
Yeah.
You know that my son is named after him?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
Wow.
My son is Joseph Alexander Sledge.
Okay.
We call him Jack, but he is named after Joe Alexander. Joe is a good friend of ours.
Oh, he was an incredible historian, you know, nothing else.
He was
wonderful to work with.
Storm Landings and Utmost Savagery are 2 excellent books, but I don't mean to pull you out of your.
No, well, I mean, speaking of Storm Landings, because that's something that actually I wanted to ask you about. So Joe Alexander writes this very famous book called Storm Landings. So, and he says that there are only 7 of these things that are unique that happen in the Pacific, and your dad takes part in 2. So as a way to lead into your dad's experience, what exactly is a storm landing?
I mean, a storm landing is an amphibious landing onto an island into the teeth of prepared enemy defenses. As Joe said, he said it beautifully because he was a beautiful writer. The level of violence was always going to be incredibly intense because into the teeth of prepared defenses. You can't attack an island like Tarawa, which obviously my father was not at Batio, but you can't attack an island like Tarawa or Peleliu or you know, one of the smaller islands like that, or Okinawa, which was a larger island. They know you're coming, right? There's a level of awareness on the part of the enemy that you are coming, because at some point they're going to see the invasion flotilla, and then they're going to start getting pre-assault naval gunfire. So when your assault troops hit the beaches, and the 1st Marine Division had of their amphibious landings, World War II, Guadalcanal, Cape Gloucester, Peleliu and Okinawa. Peleliu and Okinawa Okinawa was really not an opposed landing. Peleliu was viciously opposed.
Yeah.
Guadalcanal was not, by the definition Joe gave it, not a storm landing. That was really more of its own military campaign encompassing air, sea, and land forces, that a very protracted campaign that went on for quite a while. But the storm landings typically were battles that did not go on for months and months and months and months. They were short, very intense, very violent, very high loss of life, and usually pretty decisive in the end result.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're going to get into Peleliu, but I wanted to bring something up. One of our viewers said he thought that it was amazing that a veteran would speak of the war to a family member, and that was unusual. I mean, it sounds like growing up with your dad, World War II was a big presence. Did you sense at the time that this was an unusual thing?
I did not sense that. No, the answer is no. I just assumed that, it amazes me more every day when I look back, through the decades of the conversations I was able to have with him. The people who have reached out to me and thanked me for my book, because they said exactly what the gentleman just said, that it wasn't typical for a lot of veterans to talk about it. And I just assumed that, I had friends whose fathers, grandfathers, uncles had been World War II veterans, and the thing that they always said was he never would talk about it. Mm-hmm. So I really feel blessed. I mean, I just don't know a better way to put it, that I was able to, number one, have the level of interest in the subject that I had, but then also that I had this amazing resource right there that I could talk to about it. I mean, like I said, I watched, and I talk about this, Chris, as you know, I talk about it in my book. I mean, I literally grew up watching him write with the old breed.
Yeah. So, and obviously, right at the start, he's kind of flunked himself out of officers candidate school. He's become a rifleman. He's gone through boot camp. He's shipped out, and one of the things I think is so special about your father's book and your impressions of his experience is a lot of times he says things that I think are unique and sort of outside of what you expect. And so before he lands at Peleliu, you have a story of him at Pavuvu, and they're watching a movie, and the projection machine breaks down, and everybody starts razzing the projector, and somebody says, put him in a line company, as if that's like a demotion. And you say that your father had mentioned that the replacements sometimes quietly questioned the old men about the Japanese, their weapons, and about fear. There was little kidding about these subjects, and I found the veterans of great help to me in describing from their experience what we would have to face in the next battle, or blitz as they called it. And what really kind of struck me about that, and the question I had, usually you hear about when replacements show up at a new unit, they're kind of ignored or not paid attention to. And I know a lot of the 101st guys I knew said, by the end of the war, we didn't talk to replacements. This seems unique to me, and I thought it was interesting your dad pointed that out. So maybe you could kind of talk about the camaraderie and that sort of transition process, and maybe is the 1st Marine Division unique in this?
Well, I think so. I would say this in response, Chris. For one thing, you have to understand that after Guadalcanal, the 1st Marine Division goes to Pavuvu in the Russell Islands to begin training for, to begin training to take on replacements, to fill out what they lost at Guadalcanal, and to begin training for what would be the next operation, which of course would end up being in the Palau Islands. Pavuvu, my dad, there was so much great material that got edited out of With the Old Breed where he talked about Pavuvu, and he said, people back home could not understand the level of isolation and the primitive living conditions that we experienced at Pavuvu. And I think that level, those austere conditions, those primordial conditions, probably helped drive the guys together in a lot of ways. I mean, they're literally building their training base and where they're going to live as they're training and taking on replacements, guys like my dad. And when my father showed up in March of 1944, when he showed up in the Pacific Theater, coming up from New Caledonia, the 1st Marine Division, like their guys are just getting back from Cape Gloucester, New Britain,
Right.
Which was certainly no cakewalk of an operation, So I think that the isolation that the entire division existed in, that might have driven the guys together to a degree. And I think I will say this: some of what you talk about with the guys from the 101st, there was a degree of that. My dad talked about Snafu. Snafu Shelton, was his foxhole buddy, or one of his foxhole buddies, and was the gunner on the 60 millimeter mortar that my dad was his assistant gunner on. Snafu was very taciturn and very closed to interacting with my father and getting to know him. And obviously that changed by the time they begin getting through the first days of Peleliu. But I asked my dad, because Snafu really fascinated me, and I remember speaking to him about that when I was a kid. And I said, because Snafu, he was a really small guy, but he was tough as nails. He was mean as hell. I mean, there was no fear in the man at all. And I asked my father, I said, was Snafu just a complete jerk to you all the time? And he said, no, not at all. But he just, he had just come off of Cape Gloucester. He'd lost a lot of buddies, as they all had. And he said, I talked to Snafu. This is what he told me. He had talked to Snafu about that in later years, when my dad's book came out and they kind of reunited. And Snafu, he did warm up to my dad, but as he told my dad, he said, look, I'd already lost so many buddies by the time you showed up. I really didn't want to get close to somebody and have to go through all that again. So the answer I'm giving you to your question is a 2-tiered answer. I do think the environment and the austere primal conditions drove the guys together because they had to exist together and they had to survive. But I think also there were individual elements of that isolation, just like, you're a new guy, you don't know what you're doing. But I do think it seems like from the material that I extracted from my dad's writing, it really seemed like the Marines understood that we're going to have to bring these guys along. We're going to have to get them up to speed because they're going to be in a rough situation, and then my dad was in that situation talking about toward the end of Okinawa, and I don't want to get ahead. You're good.
Go where you want to go.
I mean, he described on Okinawa being near Half Moon Hill, or pushing down toward the Shuri complex, Shuri Ridge. And he describes the battlefield conditions as being like flung into hell's own cesspool. That's a direct quote from what he wrote in With Hilbury. But, just the rotted dead bodies, water-filled foxholes, maggots everywhere, burned out, shot up amphibious tractors and tanks. And he, like the scene reminded him of this mud-torn, like Flanders in World War I. He said, like a massive garbage dump. I mean, the horrible conditions were unimaginable to the average person. And he talked about how these new guys would come into K Company. I mean, guys fresh from the States. And of course, they began paring down the training syllabus as the war progressed because they had to get guys into the front lines quicker and quicker and quicker because of casualties. And he talked about how it really struck him. These new guys would come up to the line and take a foxhole position, up near Wanna Ridge, Half Moon Hill. And he said that the look of utter despair on the, they show up and their weapons and 782 gear are fresh and not mud stained or bloody yet. And these guys come up and this look of bewilderment as they look around and see the desolation that was Okinawa at that point in that battle. And he said it just struck him, that utter look of desperation and desolation, and just like they had never seen anything like this, and they were just trying to absorb it all. And then frequently they would begin coming under heavy Japanese artillery or mortar fire within minutes of a guy showing up. So he just said it was he said, as bad as it was for me, I at least had
Yeah.
My buddies around me like George Surratt and Snafu and Jay DeLoe and God, we'd been together through all of Peleliu. We
Yeah.
knew what to expect. We were mentally conditioned. And these replacements are coming up short on training because of the abbreviated training syllabus. And it was just shock, and then to deal with heavy shell fire coming in, it was just overwhelming to these guys. And I think my dad he felt a degree of sympathy for them.
Yeah.
You devote about 20 pages of your book to your dad's first day in combat, which is the landing on Peleliu on September 15th, 1944. And you have a quote from him there. He's talking about the moment the Amtrak starts heading for the beach. And he says, "Everything in my life was prior to or after that awesome moment." And it seems from this and from the time that you spent on it that despite the many weeks of combat that would follow on Peleliu and Okinawa, that this day really stood out for him.
Yeah. I actually remember when he wrote that part in With the Old Breed, and because I remember him and my mom discussing that. And that is a powerful moment. And I tell you, if we can refer to the Pacific miniseries here, I think they did a beautiful job of capturing that, because I've been on a lot of podcasts, a couple of them with Bruce McKenna, very good friend of mine, one of the executive producers and writers of the Pacific, very good friend of mine. And they show, when the guys go down to the tank deck of the LST and they get aboard the amphibious tractors and they crank those radial engines up, and then, the guy says, "Here we go, boys." And you hear the alarm bell ringing, and you see those clamshell doors on the LST begin to open. My dad talked about it with the Old Breed, how you could hear those doors cranking open, and of course the tank deck is full of blue exhaust fumes from the engines of the amphibious tractors, and the sunlight began to stream through, and they start getting all that daylight in their faces. The LVTs lurch and they start going forward and go down the ramp. And in the Pacific miniseries, they do a beautiful job of showing Joe Mazzello playing my dad as those clamshell doors of that LST begin to crank open, and that, his Amtrak starts forward. It's like he comes through this dark tunnel out into the light, and it's almost like he's being reborn in that moment.
So Henry, I've been really privileged. I've been able to go to Peleliu a great many times, and every time I go, it's awe inspiring.
It's incredible.
And I use your dad's book to basically guide people through Peleliu. So it always moves me, impresses me, all kinds of things. But I understand, you had a chance to go to Peleliu, and I'd be kind of curious what you thought of it, and how it compared to what you'd heard so much growing up.
Going to Peleliu in 1999, that was the 55th. Man, that's one of the coolest things I've ever done. To retrace my dad's footsteps, to go on to Orange Beach too. I just remember being captivated by that spot of where K-35 went ashore. And I would be even more so now, because I'm even more familiar with the story, having, brought in the material that didn't get published, and With the Old Breed into my book, and talking about, as they begin to advance inland, the airfield. My buddy Eric Maylander, who was my guide on that trip, I told him, because I remember talking to my dad about him describing when they attacked across the airfield, and I told Eric Maylander, put me on that airfield right where my dad would have gone across. And Joe Alexander, we were together, and I'll never forget, Chris, we get out of the van, and Joe said, "Guys, Henry's probably going to want some time alone."
Yeah.
And so, and I write about it, I talk about, you hear the haunting jungle birds out in the jungle growth calling to each other, a faint breeze. It was hot, but nothing like it was for my dad and his buddies. And it was just to look up through the jungle growth and see the ominous crags of the Umer Brogel, knowing that they were taking really heavy fire from those ridges. I mean, it was just a spot that I wanted that moment to just go on forever.
Yeah.
To be at the bunker on Ingusibus,
Yes.
where they engaged in a pretty heavy firefight and ended up killing like 17 Japanese, and I knelt down in the exact spot where my dad looked over the wall and the Japanese machine gunner loosed a burst at him. That was an amazing moment in my life. I would love for my son to be able to experience that too. Just the whole island. It's haunting. It's captivating. It's horrible. It's beautiful. I could just go on and on. I tried to write it in a way that would be dramatic yet still factually depict what we did and what we saw. But just such an amazing experience.
Yeah, and I got to say too that you maybe experienced the same thing. It also helped me understand the battle so much better. I mean, I'd read about it, I'd studied it, I'd looked at all the maps, but until you kind of get there and stand on the airfield or go to the light bulbs just start kind of popping,
Well, and of course, the jungle growth, Mother Nature reclaims herself as the years go by. But one of the coolest things I saw was the bunker on Ingusibus. There were, and we refer to Ingusibus, that's a tiny island for our listeners that aren't exactly sure, about 100 yards to a couple hundred yards across the channel from off the northern edge of Peleliu. And I think it was 13 days into the battle, they sent 3-5 across to neutralize that. And to be at that bunker where they got into a heavy firefight, there were a couple of gun pits, shallow craters still, that were there. And this is 1999. A lot of the detritus was still there. And there were those canisters of 60 millimeter mortar rounds around the edges of these, what had been gun pits. So after that firefight, my dad and his buddies dug in for the night and spent the night right there.
Yeah.
And every night when they would dig a gun pit, they would place their ammunition around it for immediate use to fire out to the company front as needed. And seeing those canisters of 60 millimeter mortar shells, and they were covered with moss and all kinds of covered with moss and dirt, but you could plainly see what they were. And, my friend Eric said, "Henry, do you realize that your dad had his hands on those mortar rounds?"
Yeah.
And I mean, you talk about something that I wanted to just grab it and with me, and I don't think customs would let you bring 60 millimeter mortar rounds through.
Yeah,
I think
a little touchy.
That'd be a little touchy, but it was just a captivating thing. I mean, it was hard to explain.
Yeah.
We have a question from a viewer, Glenn, who asks, and this is something you did write about, did your dad have a lot of nightmares after the war?
Yeah, the nightmares came earlier in his post-war life. I think writing with the old breed helped him cathartically deal with that. And I do talk about that in my book. I do also tell the story, and I love telling the story because it really gets people's attention. I remember when we were being interviewed by the HBO people back in 2010, my mother told the story of one of my dad's fellow veteran friends, was probably Sid Phillips, had told her not long after they got married, he told her, whatever you do, if you need to wake Eugene up in the middle of the night, don't grab his shoulder and shake him. Do not ever do that. She said, "Okay, well, if I need him in the middle of the night, what do I do?" And he said, "Lean over and whisper in his ear, 'Sledgehammer.'" And he said, "He'll be instantly awake." And as she told to the HBO people who were interviewing us for the accompanying documentary, she said, "One night I tried it. I just leaned over and whispered, 'Sledgehammer.'" And she said he was just instantly awake.
Well, you have another story. Was it his aunt who was trying to wake him up?
Yeah, my great aunt Octavia, his aunt Octavia, my grandmother's sister. Yeah, not long after he got home back to Mobile, he had gone. It was a hot summer afternoon. He had gone back to the back bedroom, and I know exactly where it was because I went to that house, my grandmother's house, many times as a kid. And he lay down to take a nap, and his aunt Octavia was there for a visit. And she went back, and she didn't know this. She went back there, saw him asleep, and needed to wake him up. And she began shaking him by the shoulder, Eugene, wake up. And he came up with his hands around her throat.
Mm.
And of course, as soon as he realized, or she was horrified, as soon as he realized what he'd done, he felt terrible. But that was the environment these guys had to exist in, and that kind of reshaped the man he had become. I personally never saw him have a nightmare. I know that my mother, again, as I write about in my book, she told my brother and me when we were kids, if you need us in the middle of the night, come to my side of the bed. Don't go to your father's side of the bed and touch him.
Right. Right.
Mm.
But I think when With the Old Breed got published, and as the years went by, that I think that was very much a catharsis for him. And I think getting, I actually talk about this quite a bit in my book. I think that helped him process a lot of that and deal with it.
So I want to talk some more about the book too, and about kind of the process of that. So this has become such a classic. It's gone out to everybody, but where's the point? Did he where he says, I've got to write this down? And so kind of what was the genesis of the book?
Well, the genesis of the book was, and I sent a couple of pictures to Cheryl. I don't know if she was able to get them to you.
I don't have them, but
Okay.
what do you want to do? I do have a picture of the Bible, if that's what you're going to ask about.
Yeah, show that if you want to. He carried his New Testament Bible. That Bible he carried with him in his dungaree shirt pocket, which the dungaree is framed behind me on the wall. And he began keeping notes. Now, what you see there is some handwritten notes in the front leaf of the Bible, but most of the notes were on little pieces of paper that he tucked into the Bible itself. And of course, they were forbidden from keeping diaries because the thinking was if a Marine was captured, God forbid, or killed and had a diary on him, the Japanese could use that for intelligence information, and it was a legitimate concern. But he did keep notes on pieces of paper tucked into that Bible. And so when he came home, he took those out and began writing. He wrote an outline of all of that on legal pad, on a legal pad, piece of legal paper, and then began to, and that would have been not long after he came home. But I recall in the early 1970s when I'm, 3 or 4 or 5 years old, seeing him sitting by the fireplace at night, scribbling away on yellow legal pads. He always wrote on yellow legal pads, and he always wrote in pencil. And that's what he was doing. He was taking that outline that he had made not long after he got home that came from information from the Bible, and he was beginning to write his memoir.
But why did he feel then? I mean, you might not know, but what was it you think that compelled him to say, I've got to write this down?
Well, I think a couple of things. I mean, I mentioned earlier the cathartic need to exorcise these demons, and writing about it seemed to expunge that.
Right.
The other thing was he wanted to have a written record of what he had seen and experienced, so that my brother and I would have some understanding of his wartime experience, because he had been able to see letters written by some of our ancestors from the Civil War when he was a kid. And I think that really resonated with him. And he felt like I've got to be able to write something down that my family can see later and have an appreciation for what I saw and experienced. So no intentions of getting it published.
Yeah.
But I'm curious too about his process in the sense, because this material, a third of which appears in his original book. I don't know what percentage of it appears in your book, but this amount of material goes into great detail. So, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but did he do a lot of rewriting? Did he do a lot of consulting with fellow veterans to try to get the facts straight of what he was writing? I mean, do you have any idea of kind of what that process was?
Oh, he kept up a regular correspondence with other K-35 Marines, many phone calls. As far as writing the manuscript itself, I mean, I can remember seeing the pages of handwritten material on those yellow legal pads where he would go back and erase something and put a bubble, like a bubble, and write into that bubble of amended information or corrected information after maybe a conversation, with somebody that he'd served with. But that, if you get into the mechanics of him writing his book, there you peel back that layer of, he was a scientist. At that point in his life, he's a trained PhD biologist. And scientists are trained to observe and take careful notes and verify again and check their sources. That was part of his training as an academician and a biology professor coming out there.
But then, so he's got it at a point where he's comfortable with it. But you mentioned that it's actually your mom that says,
yes,
so publish this. That's a bigger step.
Yeah. He asked her, after he had written quite a bit of the manuscript, he asked my mother, and I actually didn't know this little detail until I was well into writing my book, and it ended up being, sadly, not long before my mother passed away. He asked her, she told me that he asked her pretty early in the process if she would type what he was writing. And she did not want to do it, but he said, well, if you don't do it, I'm going to have to find somebody who will. And so she agreed to, and she typed the Peleliu portion, everything from the beginning through Peleliu. She typed that. And by then he had a grant from the University of Montevallo where he was on the faculty, and his secretary typed the remaining half of the manuscript. But as she began typing it, my mother was the one who really was captivated by it. And my mother was a very prescient lady. She inspired me to write my book, but she inspired my dad not to write it, but to get his published. I mean, I've told the story quite a bit. As she was typing it, she said, this is really powerful. I mean, we should try to get this published, and the HBO people all just laughed in disbelief when I said this, but his reaction was just complete self-deprecation. And, who in the hell would want to read this? This is just for John and Henry, Yeah.
So, but picking up on that, then, of course, it gets published. It moves thousands and thousands and thousands of people. What was your dad's reaction to people's reaction to the book? Because, there had been dozens of books written by Marines in the Pacific, and this was not just another memoir, right? This had so kind of what was his reaction to that?
Well, his reaction to, he would get letters so often from other from readers, from which you got to think in the 1980s, most of his readers were guys who'd been there.
Yeah.
And that scope began to broaden as the years went by. But his reaction to people saying it was such a powerful, moving book was just disbelief, because, and I do touch on this in my book. I mean, he was a pretty self-deprecating guy. He we had gotten a letter. My mom and dad got a letter from some reader, admirer at some point, and this was well into the 1990s when this happened. And this person was just going on and on about how powerful and moving it was and what an incredible book they thought it was. And my mother remembered this really well. He just said to her, "What is it about that damn book that people can't let go of?" And because to him, it was nothing extraordinary. It was simply being honest about what he saw and experienced. And she said to him, "Well, I think it's the empathy, the emotional honesty of it."
Yeah.
You know, and Bruce McKenna said the same thing to me. I said, "Bruce, I mean, people, you know, my dad's book just seems to have carved out a place for itself in the pantheon of great World War II literature." And I say that with total honor and humbleness. You know, there's so many great memoirs out there. I've read a bunch of them. You know, what is it about his that seems to set it apart? And he kind of the same thing. I mean, he said, "Henry, I think it's just his empathy. You know, the fact that he could do and experience what he saw and describe it the way he did with the horrific honesty and bare bones force of detail, unblinking, and then come home and step back from that and be a husband and a father."
Yeah.
And that's kind of my words right there. But, you know, I try to, that goes back to your early questions of what motivated me to do my book. I mean, to know that my With the Old Breed has that level of stature, and to know that I've gotten information that maybe people would find compelling, but also I want people to see that, if you had any curiosity about the kind of man he became after the war, I mean, I can provide unique insight into that.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question, again, another question from a viewer, but it had actually been on my list as well. What you thought of your father's portrayal in the miniseries, The Pacific? Must have been a little bit of an experience, kind of watching that on the screen for the first time.
Yeah, I think Joe Mazzello did a fine job. I think, you know, look, that's a tough assignment when they hand you a book that's gotten the plaudits that my dad's book had gotten, even at that point, you know, in 2007, 2008, when it had been greenlit and they were really starting to cast people and prepare to actually film it. You're handed a book like that, of that stature, and you're told, "Oh, by the way, you know, his widow and his two sons are going to be watching, and his whole family," you know, that was a tough role. And I think Joe Mazzello did a fine job with it. I think he portrayed the empathy that my dad had, that sense of, you know, you really see that character arc of the Sledge character, you know, those first days on Peleliu when he's just kind of bewildered by it all, you know, and the wide-eyed with, I mean, just, I can't even imagine, having never been in combat, and your introduction to it is D-Day at Peleliu. And then you see him transmogrify from that to, by the end of Okinawa, he's one of the seasoned veterans telling some of the younger guys, you know, how to do it. So that was a real character arc, you know. And one of the most powerful images from my dad's book is when he talks about in With the Old Breed, how, like, that first day on Peleliu, he comes upon the first dead enemy soldiers he had seen. And it's like 3 Japanese infantrymen who had taken a shell hit. One of them's chest is completely eviscerated. You see a dead Japanese corpsman. They didn't call him corpsman, but a medical man with his, you know, he's lying there dead. He had been trying to attend to him. You see his medical chest with bandages and medicines, you know, 2 or 3 other dead Japanese. And these are literally the first dead enemy soldiers he's seen. And this is just a few hours into Peleliu, you know, on D-Day. and two or three, or I think a couple of, he's standing there staring, agape at this. And two Marine buddies come down the beach, and they just walk up and start ransacking the bodies and pulling flags out of helmets and taking souvenirs, and he describes how one of them looks at my dad, Sledgehammer, what are you doing standing here with your mouth open with all these good souvenirs? And they're pulling the bodies around, rooting through, taking the wallets out and taking pictures, and this is standard procedure. And my dad talks about how, they put the stuff they want into their own pockets and just throw the bodies to the side and kick the helmets. And then, see you, Sledgehammer, and walk off down the beach. And my dad describes how he's just standing there open mouth, like he cannot believe what he's just seen. And then he reflects, and the way that he does so powerfully, he says, I wondered, would the war make me so callous that I could do that to a dead body? And then he says, the time came soon enough when it didn't bother me a bit.
Yeah.
And if you knew my dad as I knew him and the love that he had for life as a biologist, to morph into what he had to morph into to survive that experience, and then to come home and be the dad that he was. I mean, it just was, I just think it was a really powerful thing. And I wanted to try to convey some of that in the old Breed Complete Story Revealed,
Well, and I think you do that with, with spades. It's fantastic. And I was curious, as somebody, you touched on this earlier, you were very fortunate that he shared a lot of these things with you growing up. You were,
right.
So you were certainly aware of it. But in the course of researching your book and telling the story again, did you learn new things about your dad, or did you kind of, what was that process like for you?
Researching that material that never got published was exciting, not because I learned anything new. And that's a very fair, legitimate question. I didn't learn anything new about my father. It was just more of what I think people's perception of him, as being this kind of man who could be sensitive to the suffering around him that he was experiencing along with all his buddies, and yet still try to retain his own sanity. But no, I didn't read things that go, oh, I never knew that about my father.
Yeah.
I didn't experience that at all.
Right.
So we're coming up on the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. At this point, even many children of veterans are in their 70s, in their 80s. So what lessons would Eugene Sledge and Henry Sledge want us to take from that cataclysm?
Well, my father, if he were here to answer that question, he would say, always remember the guys who didn't make it home. Because to him, the great tragedy was his buddies, his fellow Marines and soldiers who, not that he had personal friends in the Army in World War II. He did interact with guys in Army outfits, but not enough to become really close friends with them. The thing he would want people to do is never forget the ones who died, and that anybody would say that, I guess. For me, obviously the World War II veterans are sadly, there's so few of them left, that the chance to interact with them is just evaporating on a daily basis. But, look, one sad thing about the human condition is that wars will never stop. And to fight those wars, somebody's husband or brother or son or daughter, will have to go and experience that. And we should never lose our desire to try to honor their service. And if they want to talk about it, be there to talk about it with them. Some of them may not want to talk about it, and you have to respect that. But I just think that to somehow find a way to continue honoring our veterans is something we always have to do.
So, Andy, this is something I wanted to ask earlier, but I want to try to squeeze it in because we also got a question about it. Sledge's brother had served in Europe. Right?
Yeah, my uncle
and
Eddie.
he's 741st Tank Battalion, which is they saw a fair amount of stuff. Did your dad ever talk about that with him? Did they compare notes? Was it just kind of kept separate?
I don't know that they really compared notes. That I've wondered about that. I mean, the contrast and the comparison of their two combat experiences, because my uncle saw very heavy action with the 741st and served with great honor and distinction, 3 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star, Silver Star. You know, to be a graduate of the Citadel, to be an officer, to be a tank company commander, and to experience, you know, Normandy and the Bulge and all of that, and then to be, you know, a Eugene Sledge who enlists in the Marines and fights across the islands of the Pacific. I mean, what greater juxtaposition of the individual combat experience could you have? You know, and that's really fascinating to me. I don't know that the two of them really compared notes and discussed it at length. I suspect not.
Yeah. Well, I guess, you know, what's one going to tell that the other one, you know, they both had such terrific experiences. There's probably no point in, but I was just curious about that.
No, that is a very thought-provoking question. And, you know, I've thought about maybe exploring that idea possibly in book form in the future. I don't know, but.
So is there any more material?
Well, from my dad's manuscript? Yeah, they're actually, I mean, I kind of got faced with the same dilemma that my father had. You know, people ask, why did all this material get edited out of With the Old Breed? Well, it got edited out because they didn't want With the Old Breed to be 1,000 pages long. So my manuscript, you know, when I finished writing like my narrative plus the unpublished portions of my dad's writing, was like 165,000 words. It was pretty long.
Yeah.
And I had to edit that down to around 115,000 words. You know, so I mean, yeah, there's material that I had to self-edit out of my book.
Well, I tell you what, should have come up in conversation. You've got somebody who's voting for volume 2. So
well, there's another project in the works. It won't be that, but my publisher and I actually have had a couple of conversations about it. He's really excited for me to do this, but there will be perhaps another angle to the Eugene Sledge story coming.
Well, we were looking forward to that. Henry Sledge, thank you so much for joining us today on History Happy Hour to talk about your book, The Old Breed, the complete story revealed. I think we both enjoyed the book and certainly enjoyed talking to you. So thanks for spending some time with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henry. Really appreciate it.
Oh, wow. That was pretty intense.
Yep.
Yeah. So, Chris, next week we are going to bring Helen Fry back.
Is she up to 5 yet? Does she get a hat?
This is her 4th, I think.
Oh.
I think her 4th time. So, but she's got a book called The White Lady about Belgian Secret Service network in World War I and World War II. And of course, she's Helen Fry. So she'll have lots of stories and fun things to say. And we'll be diving into kind of some spy stories that we don't know. So looking forward to that.
Absolutely. She's always great when she's on. So.
Yeah, she's fantastic. There was some weird thing the first time we had her on. There was a curtain and but I think she changed her look. I don't know. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today on History Happy Hour. Please subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, listen to our podcast. 284 episodes. Yeah. Back us on Patreon and browse historyhappyhour.com.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.